Good afternoon and welcome to the Student Hub Live. Well, this is a showcase for the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences here at the Open University. And in today's programme, we're going to introduce you to many new qualifications and new curriculum available on offer. So we've got a packed programme this afternoon. What we're going to cover is R46, which is a BA in Honours in Criminology and Sociology. Then we're going to cover R45, the BA Honours in Religion, Philosophy and Ethics. A111, Discovering Arts and Humanities. A233, Telling Stories, the Novel and Beyond. DD105, An Introduction to Criminology. DD126, Economics and Context. DD316, Modern Political Ideas. And DD319, Environmental Policy in an International Context. So some fantastic new curriculum there on offer to you. And we've got a range of academics from the university here to give you a flavour about these qualifications and modules. Now, this is a live online interactive event, so it's your opportunity to ask questions live to us in the studio, and you can do that in a number of different ways. You'll see the chat function in the room, and you can talk about anything that's on your mind. You can give advice and tips about being an OU student, meet other students, ask perhaps what qualifications they're interested in doing, and share your experiences of your own modules in that. But you can also ask questions to our panel here in the studio today. And joining me in the studio and to moderate the chat and to put all your questions to the panel is HJ and Damon. Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning, afternoon.
Afternoon. I'm so excited. I don't know what time of day it is, but yeah, we're all doing well. Lots of people are coming into the chat already, which is fantastic. We've got Kelvin, Anna, Caroline, Sue's got her cuppa ready for the event, so that's good to hear. Emma and Denise, and as Karen said, anything goes in the chat. So any thoughts, comments or questions for our fantastic guests? I know they love to hear them, questions about the modules, some tips. If you've done the modules and want to let us know what you thought, we'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And we've got lots of other content about modules that were released last autumn even, on the Student Hub Live YouTube channel, so you can get heaps more content there. We've also got some interactive tools that you can fill in. You can tell us where you are in the country, how you're feeling right now, which level you're studying, what you're studying and why you're studying, and things that you're most excited and worried about. So to interact with those widgets, just click on the one that you'd like to tell us how you feel about, and then enter the multiple choice question that applies to you. Or if there's a box with 3 options in it, you do need to put 3 things in, otherwise the results won't submit. So if you can only think of 1 or 2, that's absolutely fine. Just put those in and put a full stop in, and then you'll see what other people at home say as well. Right, well, this first section, we're going to look at R46, which is the BA Honours in Criminology and Sociology, which is a brand new joint honours degree, and it's produced by the Sociology and Social Policy and Criminology disciplines. Now, these are closely related areas, so it's a really exciting opportunity to study them in combination. And I'm joined by Peter Redman, David Scott and Jess Perriam to talk to us about this exciting new qualification. Can you start by introducing yourselves and telling everyone what you do?
Yes, I'm Peter Redman. I am the Director of Teaching for Sociology, Social Policy and Criminology, and more pertinently for this segment, I'm the Qualification Lead for R46, the new degree.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you, Peter. David?
I'm David Scott, and I'm a Senior Lecturer in Criminology at the Open University, and I am the Chair of DD105, Introduction to Criminology, and I'm also somebody who's engaged widely in issues around prisons, punishment and social justice.
And we're seeing you later today for that showcase
indeed.
on DD105,
Yes.
which will be great, David. And Jess?
So I'm a lecturer in sociology, and I'm co-chair of DD218, Understanding Digital Societies, which will be launching in 20J, but it actually forms part of R46.
Brilliant, excellent. So we'll start by giving students an overview then of the qualification, and we've got a nice slide here to show how the pathways all interlink. So let's take a look, Peter.
Okay, so let's talk through this slide. What you can see here is the structure of the degree. At level 1, you'll be studying DD102, the Introducing Social Sciences, DD105, which David's just mentioned, Introduction to Criminology. And then moving on to level 2, once you've done those, you'll study the module that Jess has just mentioned, DD218, Digital Societies. And as she said, that becomes available from 2020. If you were credit transferring into the degree, then you'd study DD206. That's the module that's currently available, the uses of social sciences. And here's the exciting bit. you'll then move on, having studied one of those modules, to DD212, Understanding Criminology, or DD215, Investigating Crime and Criminal Justice. Now, that last module is available from 2021, but it's a methods module. So if you're interested in social research methods, you've got a choice at level 2 of 2 modules, and you can choose one of them. It gives you the option to study social research methods if you want to. And then finally, at level 3, you'll study DD308, Making Social Worlds. That's the level 3 sociology module. And you'll study DD311, Crime, Harm and the State, and that's available from 2020 as well.
Excellent, thank you. So a lovely clear structure with the optionality at level 2, and then those pathways at level 3. And of course, people can find out more about those by calling the student support team and getting some advice from them about which they might prefer to do as and when the time is right. But David, I wonder if you can give us a flavour of criminology and sort of talk a little bit about how it links to these other disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, criminology is a wonderful and broad topic area. In fact, it's one of the most interesting things that you can actually ever study, because it quite frankly engages with so much of just everyday life. You know, we're talking about issues about how we think about crime, harm, justice, how we think about the political system, how we think about the police, the prisons, how we think about the broader forms of harm around poverty and forms of injustice. It's one of the most amazing and quite frankly stimulating topic areas you can ever encounter, I think. And of course, the way we've actually presented this in this degree programme, it starts by getting you into thinking just about what crime is in DD 105 and trying to almost kind of engage with your criminological imagination from that early stage. It then takes you through either this issue of theory or methods, as Peter's just indicated. So thinking about crime, how we explain crime, and how we think about the different forms of crime that impact in society today. Or we go down the pathway in terms of thinking about methods of criminal justice. And then that leads us into the end element and the level 3 part of the degree programme, which is talking about crime and harm. And this kind of opens up a whole new way of thinking about what the problems are in society and the kind of harms that we actually face. But this beautifully sits alongside the issues around sociology, because one of the things that certainly in the UK, the way in which criminology has evolved as a discipline, and quite frankly the Open University, has been absolutely central in the development of criminology across the United Kingdom. It was one of the first places in the 1970s to really engage with the sociology of deviance, and in fact led to pretty much the kind of whole development of criminology across the academy. It's an amazing connection that we have historically between criminology and the Open University. And I think it's something which we are very conscious of as the criminology team, to try and kind of build on that and to once again be the pioneers in terms of taking criminology ideas forward. But of course, it's very closely connected to sociology. Because many of us, and myself included, would probably define ourselves as sociologists. And I certainly have a sociology undergraduate background, and that's been my kind of the area which I've started to engage with. So it leads into that very, very nice interconnection between the sociology modules that are being explored in this programme and also the very basis of criminology.
I mean, because criminology was a subdiscipline of sociology initially, wasn't it?
It was in the UK. It was called the sociology of deviance at that time. So many of the kind of ideas and many of the great criminologists that evolved, and including as it evolved at the Open University in the 1970s, were part of that sociology programme. So they are very, very closely connected. And that kind of means that this intellectually is a very, very tight and cohesive approach of studying.
So
yeah.
I'm just going to come in there because we probably should mention the name of Stuart Hall, who was the head of the sociology discipline at the OU for many years, was a very famous influence on criminology in its early days, and students can go away and Google his name and
Yes, and
find out more about him.
possibly one of the top 10 most influential criminologists in the history of the UK, and also a very, very prominent sociologist. So Stuart Hall, that connection and the kind of intellectual work that he did here at the Open University, very, very informative for the development of this programme.
And one of the key things that sort of links sociology and criminology is this issue of power and inequality, for example. And I wonder, Peter, if you can talk about why that's interesting from a student's point of view.
Well, one of the most interesting things from a student's point of view about the links between criminology and sociology will simply be that the two disciplines share the same language. So if you're moving between the modules as you progress through the degree, then you're going to find that the modules speak to each other in terms of the approaches they use, the vocabulary they use, some of the concepts like power and inequality, which you've just mentioned. And obviously that means that you can move fairly seamlessly between the modules in a way that's not necessarily possible if, say, you're studying physics and religious studies, for example. So they're quite different disciplines. But
and in terms of the
sociology are
approaches,
linked.
are they asking similar sorts of questions, or are there different ways of looking at the world? How do those complement each other, and what is similar?
They are similar in the sense that, as I've just said, they have ideas in common about power and inequality, about they both use what you would call a criminological imagination, we would call a sociological imagination, that both start from the premise of looking at the world and looking at things that appear to be natural or taken for granted and trying to unpack them.
And the only difference really between the criminological imagination as we envisage it in criminology and the sociological imagination as it is within sociology is in the name. Because we both go back to the ideas of a great sociologist called C. Wright Mills, who wrote a book back in 1959 called The Sociological Imagination. And even at that point, he said that if he'd been in a different discipline like a history or anthropology, he would have called the imagination the historical imagination or the anthropological imagination. Because both of the kind of the approaches in sociology and criminology are trying to think differently. It's almost about a quality of mind. It's about a way of trying to approach and understand the world. It's about a way of joining up the dots. And I think Peter has very eloquently put this in terms of talking about both of the aspects of the degree programme have the same language. And yes, you know, one of the key elements is power. The power to define, the power to control, the power to impose your will, and also inequalities, because so much that comes into the criminological curriculum is about the problems of social and economic inequalities, and how indeed the criminal law is used somehow to control and contain those broader problems.
And I think that's also an interesting point with the sociological imagination and C. Wright Mills saying that if it was another discipline, he would have framed it in historical terms. But he wrote the sociological imagination, which then also spurred the criminological imagination, to really inspire academics and researchers to actually be active about what they're researching and taking an active role in society instead of just sitting back and being like, oh, that's happening, we've just observed it. He's actually saying, go on and do something about it, describe it, get in there and do things.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned methods before as in the context of the degree qualification and the pathways and things. And you've mentioned the sort of stances or theories, but how are the methods similar then? And how might that then link to sort of the way that we assess students in terms of this degree?
Okay, well, the social research methods module that I mentioned, DD218, will teach students how to research criminological subjects, but also how to research sociological subjects, so social problems. So the methods that criminologists use and sociologists use are basically the same. They're social research methods. And they're either going to be quantitative or qualitative, meaning to do with numbers or to do with investigating what people believe, think and do, so observing and describing those things. And in terms of assessment, in terms of the whole degree, the assessment's broadly similar in each module, and we could say, you know, that a sociological essay is very similar to a criminological essay. use of evidence, the use of theory, the use of concepts, and so on. So there's an overlap there in terms of assessment. I suppose the key thing is that in this degree, at level 3, you get a chance to do a self-directed project where you'll come up with your own research question, and whichever module you actually choose at level 3, there will be a project of that kind to do. If you do the social research methods module, it probably will give you a chance to do a more in-depth actual research module, a research project rather than a literature-based project.
That's a wonderful overview of things. I'd like to get a bit more specific, but before we do, we asked everyone at home what they were studying, and a lot of people are doing criminology and also psychology as well, so do fill in those interactive widgets there. HJ and Damon, have we got any immediate questions to ask our panel?
We haven't got immediate questions, but we've got some good comments. I think Denise said a good one as well, that criminology sounds interesting as part of an open qualification because it links to so many other areas as well. So we talked about how it links to environment, ethics, politics, religion, history and childhood study as well, which I think is a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interest in linking it to previous studies. So some people have studied DD101 previously with power and agency and then moving through their studies. So they're making those connections already.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, we've selected 3 images because whilst this is all very good theoretically, it's nice to sort of describe some concrete examples of some of the things that we're talking about. And the first image that you've selected for us is about climate change emergency protests. And I wonder if we could sort of talk about some of this overlap and really sort of convey how it's taught. So let's see the image you've selected. Right.
Okay, well, I think this is kind of something which really ties a lot of the issues around sociology and criminology together, because to some extent, when you talk about sociology, you talk about these broader social dimensions, including, of course, how we all interrelate as human beings. And then criminology brings down a focus to almost when things are going a little bit wrong, when things aren't quite working as they should be working in terms of societies. And of course, today we have this element where we've got massive concern about climate change and protests generated from that. And of course, what criminologists are interested there is not just, of course, the broader issues of carbon dioxide emissions and so on and so forth, but how we respond to both the harms that are being generated to the planet and how we as individuals are collectively responding to that, for example, through protest and, you know, people blocking roads and kind of stopping kind of various different forms of fracking or kind of saying that we need to stop this form of industry and so on and so forth. So I think that from a criminological point of view, it's how the law is used and how we kind of think about harms and how we think about crime. But that then leads us back in perhaps to the kind of broader sociological elements that the rest of the degree is kind of engaging with.
And the other image that you've selected is about the police. So clearly issues here that might be obvious, but why have you chosen this image?
Well, here's another example of kind of power and inequality. And of course, the police operate in a way which obviously they have great power invested in their role, but they also operate within unequal societies. So the way that the police actually function is about maintaining the status quo. It's about maintaining order. And of course, if there are people at the bottom end of society who are protesting against inequalities, inevitably you have a police force which is about maintaining how things are. So you have then a conflict and an issue that can generate through that. And of course that may well be linked in to things like protesting against climate change and protesting against the various different problems that we face in terms of the environment today.
So these are questions that those images would spur for a criminologist. I wonder what sorts of things come up to mind from a sociological perspective.
Well, from a sociological perspective, I'd say the questions are more to do with the way that society is actually organised. So sociologists, for example, in relation to the climate emergency, are interested in how the forms of social organisation as they currently exist are promoting the climate emergency and trying to think about ways in which we could organise society differently and thereby mitigate the emergency and perhaps live in a carbon neutral society. Getting to that carbon neutral society is going to be the big challenge of the 21st century. Sociologists have a very important role to play in thinking about forms of socialisation that will facilitate that, and also how to get people to engage with those forms of organisation in productive ways. Do you want to say anything about that, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there would be something to say around kind of, especially with the climate crisis, you're thinking about, well, what objects are involved? Are there other things at play? So can we consider the weather or objects or carbon as being powerful or having as much as what we would call agency as people as well? And as sociologists, we're just as interested in them and what they have to say and are telling us about the world around us as well. So I think that would be another way that sociology might think about things a little differently.
Which, of course, is one of the key themes of DD218, the module that you're co-chairing.
It is.
Which is the relationship between people and things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And the third image is of a traffic jam.
Okay, so this is, we chose this from a sociological point of view because it raises the kind of questions that I've just been talking about in relation to social organisation. So it's quite obvious that as a society, in Western societies, we've become heavily reliant on petrol and diesel engine cars. It's very difficult to organise your life without one quite often. And often we take these cars for granted or just consider it inevitable and necessary that society is organised in that way. But of course, it's not inevitable and necessary. Society could easily have been organised differently. And although cars have brought many benefits, they've also caused lots of problems that we know about. So one of the most obvious is the one we're talking about, the climate emergency, in terms of which steel production for the production of cars, burning of fossil fuels is contributing massively to the climate emergency. But also air pollution, as we know, is causing major health problems. And the obesity epidemic in the West is partly the result of lack of exercise caused by people using cars for short journeys rather than taking public transport, using bicycles and walking. Yeah. So the question for sociologists is always, how did this come about if it's not, it looks natural, it looks inevitable, it looks necessary, but of course it's not. So how did that come about? And also, more importantly, how could we do it differently? What forms of social organisation would allow us to, would allow individuals, for example, to walk, to use bicycles, to use public transport, rather than immediately going to use their car?
So it's a lot of these questions then, and you've been sort of speaking about what Jess said about the relationship between a lot of these aspects. Now, Jess, I wondered if you could just give us a bit of a preview about DD218, because as you said earlier, Peter, that's not quite ready yet, but you've got a little video clip to show us, and I wonder if you could just give us a flavour about what that's all about.
Yeah, so as part of DD218, we're looking, as Peter said, about power and inequality, but we're also bringing in some of those criminological ideas around social harm and thinking about, in our lived experience doing life online or doing life with technology, where might there be parts of social harm that arise? So the clip that we're about to show talks about content moderation on social media platforms and the difficult decisions that we have to make around what's harmful, what's not harmful. So we spoke to Tarleton Gillespie, who's a researcher at Microsoft Research over in the US, and here's what he's had to say.
Brilliant, let's take a look.
So for me, content moderation, if we can reveal it, if we can make it visible, and how platforms devote a huge amount of resources to it, a huge amount of labor to it, and while they're saying, come play in this open space, they are regularly, relentlessly monitoring and making judgments about what should come down, who should be removed, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, adjudicating some of the hardest questions we have, right? What's the right amount of explicitness to reveal? How do you protect children but also give people room for sexual expression? How do you give room for vibrant debate that can be testy, but also look out for harshness and attacks? And whose job is it to do that? We've built up a mechanism that does it, We just haven't interrogated it as a kind of sociological phenomenon very well. My sense is that what has changed in the last couple of years, and maybe the problem was always there, but the recognition of the problem, is that we've had to move from a question of private harms to a question of public harms.
Lovely. So just in a nutshell then, why do you think students should study R46?
Well, I think if you read the news a lot and you get frustrated and you want to know more, that's precisely why you should study R46, to get a handle on what's happening in society and have some theoretical tools to grapple with that, and also get some methodological training to explore it further yourself.
Great, thank you. David?
Because it'll be fascinating, interesting, and it'll be something which you'll find both challenging, but also at the end of it, you'll have a different way probably of thinking about crimes and the broader society that we live in.
And finally, Peter?
OK, I'm going to quote Karen Gregory, who's one of the contributors to DD218, this new second-level sociology module. And she said in an interview we did with her for the module that everyone should study social science because you can't consider yourself an active, functioning citizen. In fact, she said you can't consider yourself an adult unless you've actually studied a social science module, at least one of them. And so I'd say study criminology and sociology, and then you'll definitely be an adult, active, functioning citizen.
Well, if nothing else, that's an amazing reason. Jess, David and Peter, thank you so much. That's been fantastic, a really wonderful flavour of the module, and I know that students are really, really going to enjoy the qualifications as well. So thank you. Right, that's the end of that session. We've got some videos to play you in our break. We've got a Who's Who with David Scott. Then we've got an animation video about crime, and then we've got a Who's Who video from Jess. And then in the next section, we will be focusing on the R45 qualification, which is the BA Honours Religion, Philosophy and Ethics. So join me for that next session very soon.